Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. Hello and welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today's guest is nothing short of a legend. With over 500 million books sold and decades of terrifying readers, myself included, and that in the best way possible, Dean Koontz has mastered the art of suspense, mystery, and some heart-stopping horror. So his latest novel, Going Home in the Dark, is a chilling exploration about facing your past and embracing the shadows that always seem to call us home. So turn the lights down low, check the door locks, and let's settle in. Welcome to the show, sir.
Well, thanks for having me there.
I'm very happy to have you today. Dean, you've kept us on the edge of our seats for decades now, but with this new book, I think you've delivered something that feels both at the same time very classic Koontz, but also totally unexpected. So I just have to know, when you're sitting down to write at this point in your career, what still keeps that fire lit for you? What gets you back to the keyboard instead of, say, adopting a dozen golden retrievers and calling it a day?
That sounds pretty appealing, actually. You've put a strange thought in my head. If this is the end of the career, I think you're responsible if I just walk away. A dozen golden retrievers. Well, the one thing that keeps you going is trying things you haven't tried before that you're not sure you're going to be able to achieve, and that you might fall flat on your face. In other words, you can sort of use that terror of the humiliation to guide you forward and to keep you motivated. And that I've always, or for a long time, I've used some humor in novels, but more so perhaps in this one than others. And I've done things like really break the fourth wall in this book, and use some techniques that I wasn't sure would resonate perfectly. And that's what keeps you going. You want to see if you can pull this off, and face the consequence if you can't. And fortunately, the people, at least in my professional life, all think that this book pulled it off. So that gives you a sigh of relief. And then you go forward with something else you think might destroy your career and see if you can do that.
I love it, and you're right in the approach to humor. I feel like it really works. It really worked for me. I will say I had a lot of laugh out loud moments with a lot of moments as well. So there's all of those are sort of definitely intertwined, and I definitely want to talk about those. But before we dive in, how about telling us a little bit about what the book itself is about?
Well, it's about four people, three guys and a girl who were nerds in high school and middle school, and probably from the day they were born, and who found each other when they were 13, 14, uh, and formed this little group that they call the Four Amigos. And it was that group that kept them sane and connected throughout their adolescence, because all of them came from dysfunctional homes of one kind or another. And now we see that part of their lives in cuts to the past. But when we open the book, all of them are successful in ways they never would have imagined. One of them is a successful actress, one a successful writer, one a successful artist, painter, and one a successful songwriter. Three of them have left home long ago, have actually escaped their little town of Maple Grove, but one of them has remained at home. And when they get a word that he's in a coma, they all go back to Maple Grove out of the bonds of friendship. And of course, they discover that their hometown is nothing like they imagined it had been when they were growing up. There are secrets of which they were maybe not unaware, but which they'd been made to forget. And it's sort of going home story with all kind of suspense, but all kind of laughs as well.
So it's a great point. Most of the main characters here are returning home after years away, and it's unsettling for them. And it kind of had me thinking too. Whenever I go back to where I grew up from, I grew up in the South in North Carolina. There's always this like low hum of dread that just kind of sits right there in the gut. Sometimes about it. And so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that inspiration, about the inspiration behind the theme for going home again and what makes it both comfortable and terrifying at the same time.
Well, I think I was, even as I was writing it, it was not quite as aware as I became by the time I finished the book, that I was really drawing on the way it had felt to be who I was in the town I was when I was growing up. My dad, as I've said before, was a violent alcoholic. He was a gambler, a womanizer. He held 44 jobs in 34 years,
Wow.
often punched out the boss. And it was a small town. Everybody knew about him. And that was something you grew up with, or I grew up with as a child. Uh, and as an adolescent, it was that constant humiliation and embarrassment about where you came from, which side of the tracks you were on, in other words. But times 10, because my father was an unusually flamboyant example of the wrong way to live. And all of these characters came from different humiliating backgrounds, and that's what bonded them when they were kids. And so I was getting to write out some of my own frustration, I think, about the way I grew up and my own wish to have had four amigos when I was that age. Plus, because of who they have become by the time they're 35, one of them a writer, one of them an artist, one of them an actress, one of them a songwriter. I got to talk about all those arts and things I've known and learned about them over the years that I find interesting or funny or whatever. And that was a great deal of pleasure to sort of dig into that and make use of your own experience to that extent.
So let's talk about the characters a little bit. Of all the characters in the book, is there one that you personally relate to, or maybe even not even relate to, but maybe one that stayed with you after the final draft? Before you answer that, for me, I think it's almost every single scene with Britta, who is Ernie's mother. I don't know why, but I love this woman. I know where she ends up in the story, and I won't spoil it, but I got to tell you, some of my favorite moments were with Britta, especially the age 6 birthday party. I found that back and forth absolutely hilarious. It was one of those moments where we're talking about comedy that just had me laughing out loud. I mean, relentless, and I loved it. So that's great.
I've heard that from a few people, and I have to say, even though she's a horrible human being, Britta is probably the most fun to write about in the novel. Her attitude, her sense of superiority and arrogance is so far off the top, that over the top, that she is unconsciously hilarious. And that's part of why I think she works. She would never think of herself as hilarious, but
No.
she certainly is. And every time I wrote that scene, I was laughing out loud.
Yeah, it was fun, and that innocence of Ernie at 6 years old, and his innocent questions that would drive her insane. It just it made my day. It was one of the best moments, I think. And I mean, there's some great moments across the board, obviously, but one of the ones that really stood out for me.
I think if I remember right, that's where the food is on his plate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the moving back and forth of the peas and why he's doing it. It was just hilarious. I just loved it. It was really funny. And there's also that moment of him when he was 3 years old, and I think that's something that's revealed much later in the story. And but wow, that's, I guess it's really kind of a first insight into who Britta really is. That's all we'll say. I won't spoil anything, but but a great character. I love Britta. She's fantastic. Were there any other characters that stood out or stayed with you after the draft?
Well, I love all the four leads because they interact so well together. I think it was it's kind of difficult to portray genuine friendship and how it functions and the way you are with people that you feel that close with. And somehow these four came together in my mind such that when if they're together and talking to each other, they put each other down, but they love each other at the same time. And I felt it all seemed very genuine to me, and I came to love all of them. But there is another walk on, the fellow they meet in the hospital for several scenes. His name is Butch, and those scenes were a great deal of fun to write. So it's sometimes in this book, there's so many colorful small town characters in it that some of those were just as much fun to write about as the leads.
Another one I really enjoyed was the gift shop lady, and and so she was fun too. Uh, Going back to the main characters, you had talked about sort of their closeness with one another, and you do something in the book that imparting all this information in a single glance, which happens a little later in the story, and I loved it because you spend a lot of time conveying this one single message, but they do it in one glance at each other. And I'm sitting here and I found myself looking up and I'm like, how would I do that? How would I glance at you and convey and I was working on the expressions in my face what was happening. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing because it can definitely be done. So for sure. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the big bad, and we don't have to sort of say who, or maybe it's not even the big bad, but the reveal at the end, if you will. I got to say, I didn't see it coming. And I like to pride myself in sort of thinking a bit ahead and like, how would I do this? Where would this story go? And I didn't see it coming. And I absolutely loved the reveal. I thought it was bold. I thought it was a very clever conceit. And ultimately, at the end of the day, for me, it just gave this whole story a much deeper and I'm gonna say also a little more meaningful chill to it for me. It really got my brain buzzing about the possibilities of a situation like this happening. And I'd love to know sort of where that inspiration for that twist came from and sort of how that sort of developed.
It's a little hard to talk about without giving it away, but I will say this, that for a large part of the novel, I kept saying to myself, what the hell is going on in Maple Grove? I didn't know. And I came to a moment where I happened to remember a newspaper article I read about something, I won't say what. And I went, oh, wait a minute. That's what's going on. And within about 15 minutes, all the little pieces of how you would explain this fell into place. And I felt great relief at the moment I knew how I was going to explain this because I was presenting so many bizarre moments that they had experienced in their adolescence that were going to have to be explained. Uh, and I kept getting further and further in the book without having that explanation. But I have been doing this long enough that I've learned that something's going on in your subconscious when it puts you that far out on the limb. And it does have the answer. You just have to earn it by getting far enough into the story that the subconscious finally says to you, you remember this thing you read or this thing you thought 5 years ago? That's where this is going. And it's always a relief. And I've learned to trust it, even though sometimes I start to worry that I'm not going to have an explanation for this. But so far, there's always been one there.
Well, I loved it. I loved the reveal. It was a fun little twist. Again, like I said, I didn't see it coming, and I thought I had this whole thing plotted out. And whoa, nope, you did not let me have that. So I will say that. But you touched on something else I wanted to talk about a little bit about things that happened in the past, whether you remember them subconsciously or consciously or not. And I think most of us have things in our past, well, I do anyway, that I would much rather forget. Stuff that I had buried down way down deep, stuff that comes floating up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and wakes you up out of a dead sleep. And you're like, oh my God, that happened, didn't it? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe some of your own personal experiences or background that helped shape the emotional core of the story. You touched on it a little earlier, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about it.
Well, what I wanted with these characters were each of them came from a different kind of dysfunctional home, but the end of result for each of them was they, at some key point in their life, childhood and adolescence, there really was nobody to turn to, and they ended up, uh, fortunately, finding each other to turn to. And what you said about things that you bury or uh, uh, you try not to focus on the memory of so much, is absolutely true, and it's one of the things that when you're writing, then you realize some of this is coming out of your personal experience, and you wanna be true to that. You wanna write about it in such a way that uh, may make the reader laugh, but has some truth about what it's like to be a child who finds themselves or feels that they have been basically abandoned by the very people who are supposed to be raising and nurturing them. And one thing that one experience I had that I'll never forget was long after I had escaped the small town I grew up in. My mother was a very good person, but unable to cope with my father and all of the surrounding forces that made her life so miserable. But she was a very sweet and a wonderful person and did her best. But there's still things you hide from yourself or you try not to think much about. And many years passed and somebody called me. I have to be careful about this. I'm going to write about it after I'm absolutely sure everybody involved is long gone. I think they already are, but I had somebody call me who married into my father's side of the family and had a horrific experience. Never had met this person, but one night she called me, got my phone number from somebody had called me 11 o'clock at night and had escaped the family because my father's side of the family was particularly strange. And I knew as soon as she called me and started talk and said, I think I don't know anything about my husband, the people who are in his family. And I had to escape it all with the children. And I just wonder if they'll talk to me about it. We talked for 3 hours. And I found out that, yes, she knew the mythical idea of what this family was and had done and been through. She didn't know any truth at all. And it was interesting to talk to her about it because I found there were all kind of things that I had simply covered over in my memory that I just didn't deal with. And having to bring her up to speed on why these things had happened to her and what she had gone through made me reach deeper into my own memory and find things that I'd done a pretty good job of not thinking about for a long time. And so I was able to tap into that when writing about these characters. I don't know if that answered your question actually, but it brought me to think about that aspect of the writing and why it was particularly interesting to me to tell this kind of story.
I think it absolutely answers the question. Thank you, and thank you for sharing that. And I look forward to that coming out in a much later story. So I'm excited for it. Um, I know you touched on this just a bit ago, but after all these years and so many stories, it's clear you've developed a deep intuition for where things are headed, and trusting your gut to sort of bring that to fruition. But I'm wondering, was there any moment during the process of writing this book that surprised you? Were there characters or even plot, or maybe even something in yourself that kind of caught you off guard that you didn't expect to happen?
Well, when you let the characters go where they want to go, which is what I do, I don't write outlines, I don't write character summaries and that kind of thing before I start. I just start and let the character walk on stage and sort of start revealing themselves. And so there's always in every book moments, oh, I wasn't expecting that. I didn't think this would happen or that would happen. Uh, I think one of the things that comes so much out of my own experience of my career is how much of it happens by happenstance, not so much by all your clever planning about how your career is going to go. And one of the examples in that is Spencer, the artist who paints while in a fugue state. Uh, he loses sense of the real world, and there's a reason that happens. And he doesn't know what he paints, why he paints it, or when he was painting it. But he comes out of his fugue state and has these giant canvases done. Uh, and that was sort of a metaphor for how character works for me. Um, I get into the character, I start going, and I don't go into the fugue state, but I go somewhere where the character rules and things start happening. Our character starts saying things that I used to stop and go, I can't have him say that. I can't have him do that. Where would this possibly go? But when I finally gave up that point of view and said, let the character do it, let the character tells me where he or she wants to go, it all started working much better and much more deeply than it did otherwise. So my days are full of surprises by what these people in the story are going to do or say.
I love that. And it's talking about Spencer, it actually has brought something up for me. I'm just wondering, is there a scene or a moment in the story that you're especially excited for readers to experience? I will tell you mine real quick. And that is when Spencer returns to his childhood home. And they're in the middle of what they're doing, and all the neighbors just start showing up for this impromptu block party. And I got to tell you, I have had the same thing happen to me every single time I went home for years, and that moment was so real for me. And I'm like, yeah. So,
Yeah, that was a fun moment. It's all the characters get trapped in the neighborhoodly feelings toward the one character, and that's yeah. I can't say I've had that same experience, although I did go back home once after all the years, and by that time already was on the bestseller list, so it was a very different experience. I saw the few friends I had in high school, and that was wonderful to see them again. But there were all kind of people who suddenly, when you went back and you were a best-selling writer and everybody knew your name, I had all these friends that I never used to know were my friends. It was people who had not, I had would never have been accepted in that clique when I was in high school. But now it was like, you remember when we did this and that? And I had sort of fun with that in that sequence where Spencer is almost a little mystified at the amount of belovedness that he suddenly has acquired.
and Bobby too, if I remember correctly, there were some, and some overshares with Rebecca as well. There was just so many great little moments. I was like, it was fun. It was fun, and it triggered a lot for me. So at this point, I think you've crafted enough stories with readers in different ways over the years that you kind of get a feeling for how to develop characters that are going to stay with us. I'm wondering, not to sound like I'm asking the same old stale question, but what are you hoping readers will stick with readers once they turn the last page? I know for me, and I mentioned it at the top, one of the things that really landed with me was this feeling, and I'm going to be real vague here, but I think you'll get it. This feeling of possibility or potential, I think, is probably the best way to describe it without getting too specific. After I understood everything that was sort of happening and why it was happening. And I'm wondering, is there a particular emotional or thematic takeaway you hope readers will walk away with?
Yeah, I think you're right there with it for what you said. It's really a story about no matter what life puts you through. Uh, it took me largest part of my life to get here, but no matter what it puts you through, the potential to live a life you want is still there. You just have to accept it and embrace it and not spend your life being upset about all the things bad that were done and happened to you. And secondly, that life is full of surprises. And that all you have to do is be aware of that and be willing to embrace the best parts and to shed concern about the worst. And all these characters go through exactly that. And they all keep a sense of humor about it all. And that basically is the second thing. I've always felt uh, I have been at funerals where things get pretty funny. I don't, I think that life in its essence is, I've said sometimes life is a parade, humanity is a parade of fools, and I'm up front with a baton. And I really do see it all that way. Life is serious, it has great meaning, and we all need to get through it with our souls intact. But at the same time, I think we're meant to have fun with it all and to see the humor in every aspect of it. Life is potentially joyous, and it's very hard or very easy to lose an awareness of that when things aren't going well. But in the end, uh, that's sort of, if you would call it a lesson, I don't teach lessons in fiction, but if there's a lessons these characters have learned, it's you never give up hope and you find other people as best you can to support your way to do the world.
I love it. I think that is sage advice. So I have a question for you. What scares you? What still scares you when you sit down to write?
Uh,
What scares you?
it comes to the same thing. It's loss, losing people, losing a dog you love. It's somebody, a dear friend who is also a dog lover, but also lost a child, said to me one time in complete earnestness and teared up and was talking at that time, long after having lost a child, decades after having lost it, but just lost a dog, said, in the end, it's all the same. The loss and the grief is the same. And that's that's a pretty astounding thing to say. Uh, but I understood exactly what he meant. And that's, I think, what in a story or in life, the thing that I fear the most is losing people, losing dogs, losing, well, I don't mind losing my wristwatch, but losing other people and animals and living things, it's the worst.
With great love comes great loss. Totally get that. So what's next on the horizon for you, sir? Are you maybe doing a memoir one of these days?
I am actually partially working on that. And when I finish the next book, I will. I've written a book coming out, I think, in January called The Friend of the Family, which is very different, has some humor in it, but not like this book. Has a character that uh, my wife loves so much, she used 2 boxes of Kleenex reading the manuscript.
Oh,
Uh, and I just finished another one, which my publisher just got, so we'll see whether I'm still with that publisher, what they think of it. And I'm now working on a book that's a comic novel in the vein of Going Home in the Dark, but yet quite different. Um, and when I finish that, I'm going full time onto the not so much a memoir of life, although it starts out with a couple of chapters with that, but it's really a memoir of the career. Because I have a lot of interesting, funny, and kind of awful stories to tell. And it seems like I ought to get that done because anyone who wants to be a writer will face many of the exact same things. And there's ways to deal with them that don't blow up your entire career. And it will be kind of fun talking about when I almost did.
that's scandalous. I love it. So, the book is called Going Home in the Dark. It's available on May 20th. And as we always like to say here at Quills and Chills, please support your local bookstores whenever possible. So, Dean, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't tell you what an honor it has been to sit and talk with you. And I really love this book. It was a lot of fun to read, and highly recommend it to anyone and everyone. So,
well, thank you very much for being there. You made it easy. So
good. That was my goal. I'm glad. I'm happy to hear that. Okay. All right, you guys. We'll see you next time on Quills and Chills. Bye.